4 years. That's how long we've been waiting since Doctor Strange cast a spell at the end of No Way Home. 4 years of wondering what happened to Peter Parker after he chose to let the entire world, including MJ and Ned, completely forget he ever existed. Well, Spider-Man Brand New Day is finally out, and it kicks off this new trilogy by not pulling a single emotional punch. And before we get a frame of live-action footage, Destin Daniel Cretton gets us with one of the best custom Marvel logos I've seen in a long time. Instead of the usual Avengers highlight reel, the letters of the Marvel logo fill up with recap of Memory Wipe. Peter on the school roof with MJ, their kiss on the bridge in London, that final goodbye at the Statue of Liberty, and the faces of Aunt May, Ned, MJ, filling in the letters M, N, and J. It's a gorgeous, kind of heartbreaking way to open the movie, and it tells you exactly what tone you're in for right out of the gate. And that's Peter's new reality now. He's living in a rundown attic apartment in Manhattan, dumpster diving for spare computer parts to fix up his suit and his tech because he's flat broke. He's still got the letter he wrote MJ at the end of No Way Home, tucked inside an old coffee cup and unread. Peter's basically a ghost in his own city at this point, and he's thrown himself into being Spider-Man 24/7 because dealing with the city's problems is a lot easier than dealing with his own. The film is directed by Destin Daniel Cretton. It's written by Chris McKenna and Eric Sommers, starring Tom Holland, Zendaya, John Bernthal, Mark Ruffalo, Michael Mando, Jacob Batalon, Sadie Sink, and Tramo Tillman. It's filmed by cinematographer Brett Pollack, and the score was composed by Michael Giacchino. This film is 2 hours, 25 minutes long, so make sure you have the RunP app handy, and it's PG-13 for all the swearing and violence. This will be Tom Holland's fourth solo Spider-Man film and the beginning of a new chapter rather than a direct continuation of the previous trilogy's structure. Before we go any further, welcome back to A Constantly Racing Mind. I'm Rob, and this is where we talk sci-fi, horror, action, adventure, prop culture, and all things geek. Now, if that sounds like your kind of channel, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now, let's get into the full spoiler breakdown of Spider-Man Brand New Day. So why does this movie look so much better, so much more grounded than the Home trilogy? Now, a big part of it comes down to Tom Holland. While not a full producer, he was consulted on what he thought fans wanted from a Spider-Man film. Now, from what I understand, he pushed hard for a back-to-basic, street-level look, and you can feel that in every frame. To get the suit right, Holland actually tried on Tobey Maguire's and Andrew Garfield's real physical suits to get a feel for the weight and the material. What they landed on borrows from both. That reflective red from Tobey's suit and that shiny deep blue from Andrew's, and because they built and shot it with real physical suit, Cretton and cinematographer Brett Pollack were able to get these tight close-ups practically inside the mask. You can actually see Holland's eyes acting through the mesh. Now, that's one decision alone that makes the swinging in this movie feel more kinetic and heavier than anything I've seen these Holland-era films before. Now let's talk about the body horror, because Peter's isolation starts triggering his unstable mutation in his spider DNA. Now, I've been calling it spider puberty because that's basically what it is. Since Peter's been suppressing his whole human life, his spider side starts spiking and it shows up as wrist pain, mood swings, and his eyes going pitch black. Kind of like how I feel making these videos. It leads to the sequence where Peter's hands start producing messy organic webbing on their own, and it's gross. He accidentally webs up his entire apartment in his sleep, nocturnal emissions, and wakes up trapped in his own cocoon. I know there's a gross joke in there somewhere. Trying to figure out what's happening to him, he watches this in-universe nature documentary about spider molting. And I love that it was narrated by David Keith, who voiced Tombstone in the old 90s Spider-Man cartoon. Now that's a deep cut, and a fun one. David's narration talks about molting as a painful kind of rebirth, which ties right back into the title, A Brand New Day. It comes out of a lot of suffering. Now, at this point in the film, Jeff Goldblum comes to mind, and I was wondering if this was going to do a full transformation into a spider. Peter even tries out the classic Tobey wrist flick with the new organic webs, and he actually calls him Peter number 2, which has got a real laugh out of me. It's gross, but it kind of works as a physical stand-in for what's happening to him emotionally. He's losing his humanity because he won't let himself connect with anyone. Terrified of what he's turning into, Peter goes to Empire State University to track down the one guy who dealt with suppressing a monster inside him, Bruce Banner. Banner's been using a modified gamma inhibitor to stay human since She-Hulk, and Peter, using the fake name Ned Leeds, tries to pick his brain about building something similar for his own DNA. But this is still an MCU movie, so we've got to deal with some studio stuff too. And the Yelena Belova cameo is one that kind of really threw me. Peter tracks Yelena down for intel on damage control since she's running the new Avengers now. Except her office turns out to be a steamy Russian bathhouse, and she makes Spider-Man strip down to his shorts and mask just to prove he's not wired. It's weird, jokey scene that stops the movie cold right when it kind of needs the momentum. She's got some fun lines in there teasing him about sad man having friends, or sad man not having friends, but the whole sequence just doesn't need to exist. John Bernthal's Frank Castle works a lot better for me. Because Peter's so isolated, Frank ends up becoming his main partner in going after damage control, and their chemistry is honestly electric. It's a total big brother, little brother dynamic right down to the running gag where Spider-Man's webs Frank's mouth shut every time he's about to drop an F-bomb. That said, now I get the softer take on Frank rubs some people the wrong way. Me too, to some degree. Peter's a little too comfortable hanging around a guy who kills people, and there are some chummy sitcom-style moments between them that skip right past the moral clash that should exist between Spider-Man's no-kill rule and what Frank actually does. He is the Punisher, remember? He punishes. Let's talk about the supporting cast for a second, because there's a huge roster of characters in this movie, and for the most part, Cretton manages to keep all of them grounded in something real. Starting with Zendaya. From what she said in interviews, she and the creative team actually went back and did a pass on her scenes because early drafts of MJ, now graduated from MIT and settled into a normal job, felt a little too normal. She fought to get MJ's dry, awkward energy back into the dialogue, and it pays off. The chemistry between her and Holland in this movie is rough in the best way. Peter remembers everything, MJ remembers nothing, and he's stuck suffering right next to the person he loves. Literally. But the real crowd pleaser here is Savage Hulk. After basically 2 decades of the MCU treating Hulk like a comic relief or a VFX problem to solve, capped off by the whole Smart Hulk era, the movie finally fixes that. When Sadie Sink's character possesses Banner and breaks his inhibitor bracelet, his brain scrambles and the old city-leveling Savage Hulk comes back. This version of Hulk is bigger, louder, and actually dangerous. They pulled back a lot of the vocal processing too, so it's just Mark Ruffalo's raw voice under the roars. And it makes him sound way more animal, more threatening. The skyscraper fight between Spidey and Hulk, with Peter using repurposed shocker gauntlets, is one of the best action scenes in the whole MCU as far as I'm concerned. And then there's the worst kept secret in Hollywood. Sadie Sink playing Jean Grey. Audible gasps in the audience I saw this with. Sony tried to keep it under wraps in the marketing, but she's playing a generally dark, tragic version of the character. The movie leans hard into that old Chris Claremont soap opera style X-Men storytelling. We find out Jean and her older sister Sarah, played by Olivia Booth Ford, were abandoned by their mom because of their telepathic abilities. Sarah got captured by damage control run by an anti-mutant zealot named William Metzger, who experiments on her to map her brainwaves and ends up killing her in the process. However, before she dies, Sarah sends Jean a garbled psychic SOS with the words VMAX in it. For most of the movie, I was right there with Peter, assuming it was some sort of kind of weapon or government project. But the actual reveal is brutal. When Jean gets captured and strapped into the same chair, she looks up and realizes VMAX was the worn-off brand name of the air conditioner vent above her sister's head. VentMax. That's the last thing her sister ever saw. Now, of course, older guys like me thought of Star Trek the Motion Picture and V'ger. Now, that realization triggers a second mutation in Jean, and she completely breaks. She freezes a square mile of New York with a pure telekinesis. Now, I know some people are going to be upset her powers are blue instead of the classic comic pink, But Sadie Sink's performance is raw enough that it didn't bother me. Sets her up perfectly for whatever she's headed next, which is clearly Westchester. Now, let's get into the climax, because this movie pulls one of the most brutal emotional fake-outs I've seen in a superhero movie. Peter saves MJ from the telepathic chaos, and they end up on a rooftop having this quiet, emotional moment where it seems like MJ is starting to remember him. They kiss, and for a second it feels like we're finally getting the resolution No Way Home Otis. Then the music twists into something wrong, and it turns out MJ's still possessed by Jean the whole time. Jean hijacks MJ's body just to mock Peter, basically saying, "You really thought true love's kiss was going to bring her back," before throwing MJ off the building, a direct mirror of Gwen Stacy's death. Instead of fighting Jean, Peter beats her with empathy. He pulls his inhibitor chip, fully leans into his mutated power to get past her defenses, and lets her into his own head. She experiences his memory of Aunt May comforting him right before she found out he was Spider-Man. Because Jean can read minds, but she's never actually felt anything like that herself. That memory gives her empathy for the first time, and she lets go of the city. Right after that, Frank fires a sniper round meant for Jean, and Peter jumps in front of it. Jean uses her telekinesis to keep him breathing while Frank rushes him to the hospital, which is a direct visual nod to the Civil War comic cover. And later, to protect Peter's identity while he recovers, Frank actually puts on the Spider-Man mask and gloves himself and waves to the crowd outside. Now, it's one of the funniest, most touching moments in the whole movie. But the scene that actually got me was the ending. Peter goes to the bodega where Ned's buying energy shots, introduces himself as Peter, and they shake hands without even thinking about it. Ned's hand goes right into their old childhood handshake. Because Ned's got the sorcerer lineage going back to the No Way Home, his muscle memory ends up acting like a crack in Doctor Strange's spell. MJ doesn't get her memory back. She just smiles a little at her necklace. But Ned does, and the movie ends on him looking at Peter and just saying, "Peter?" It's bittersweet, but it's exactly the right note to end on. I do want to note, and it's a sad note, that after finding Peter's unread letter on Frank's boat, MJ confronts Peter face to face. She admits she feels a faint connection to him, but heartbreakingly states that she does not love him because she has absolutely no memory of their past together. Despite Peter confessing his love, MJ tells him that the spell worked perfectly, saying, "I can see how the girl in that letter loved you, but I don't love you. I don't know you." And of course, we got to talk about the post-credit scene. Ned's built this Spidey tracker app trying to find Spider-Man's signal. It drops a pin on Queens, and then the app says, "New Spider-Man sighting, location unknown." The screen keeps zooming back past Earth, past Moon, out into deep space. And then it starts glitching with that same multiversal color effect from Into the Spider-Verse and the Venom movies. A new pin lights up, floating in space, beeping, and Spider-Man will return, flashes on the screen. Now that's obviously setting up a connection to Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars. There are a few theories I keep going back and forth on. One is that Dr. Doom ends up piecing together Battleworld after the multiverse collapses, and Peter's one of the survivors who got teleported there, using the tracker to signal Ned that he is alive. Another is that he's actually picking up Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, crossing over from an incursion with the Fox X-Men universe, not Tom Holland at all. And the third, which might honestly be my favorite, is that this is finally building toward the classic Black Suit storyline from the original Secret Wars comic, especially since we know there's still a piece of Venom left behind somewhere in this universe. Now, whichever theory ends up being right, Spider-Man Brand New Day is a big win as far as I'm concerned. It's the most beautiful, the most Manhattan, and the most character-driven Spider-Man movie that we've gotten in years, and it moves Tom Holland's version of the character into a generally adult chapter. Destin Daniel Cretton steps in to direct this Spider-Man movie after John Watts handled all three of Tom Holland's previous solo films. Cretton made a name for himself with films like Short Term 12, The Glass Castle, Just Mercy, and Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. And a lot of his films center on hurt, isolated people trying to find their way back to family, community, or themselves. That makes him a really interesting choice for the version of Peter Parker we leave off with at the end of No Way Home. Because Peter starts his story with nobody remembering who he is. Aunt May is gone, Tony Stark is gone, and even MJ and Ned have no memory of him. Cretton has already called this a back-to-basic Spider-Man story, and that fits because this is Peter at his most alone. He's shown he can handle big Marvel action, but his strongest work usually comes from the more grounded stuff. Grief, pressure, and strained relationships. So the big question with Brand New Day is whether he can balance all the Spider-Man energy with a Peter who's quieter, more isolated, and emotionally vulnerable. And I think for the most part he does. Chris McKenna and Eric Sommers are back writing Spider-Man Brand New Day, and that makes sense given everything they've done already with this version of Peter Parker. They wrote Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home. So they've been there for the whole arc of him, going from his eager kid looking for approval to somebody who's lost pretty much everything in his personal life. Even though not all the other three previous films always fired on all cylinders for me, what I've always liked about their Spider-Man movies is that you can feel their comedy background in them. They came out of TV comedy, and you can see that in the way Peter's awkwardness, bad decisions, and constant scrambling become part of the humor. It never feels like jokes are just dropped in for the sake of it. They usually come from Peter being Peter. They've also done a good job across the trilogy of putting Peter's personal life in conflict with what he's supposed to do as Spider-Man. In Homecoming, he wants Tony Stark's approval. In Far From Home, he just wanted a normal school trip. In No Way Home, he wanted his old life back, and every time, the cost gets bigger. Now, the action in Brand New Day is one of the biggest things that works for me. The web swinging finally feels like the kind of big open Manhattan Spider-Man stuff that I've always wanted to see in these movies, and it really does have that weight and speed to it. What I like is that it just doesn't look flashy, it feels physical. When Spidey takes off, you can feel the momentum, and the camera work really helps sell that. It never feels like he's just floating around the city, it feels like he's actually moving through it. The combat is another huge win. A lot of it feels straight out of the Insomniac games, and I mean that in the best way. Spider-Man is using the environment, webbing up everything in sight, climbing, sliding, improvising, all the stuff that makes his fights fun to watch when they really lean into what the character can do. And then there are the bigger set pieces, which are really where the movie goes all in. The fight with the hand is one of the standout sequences in the whole movie, and the Hulk stuff has that kind of scale and danger I've been wanting to see more of. It actually feels like Hulk is being treated like a real threat again, instead of just a punchline. If I had to sum it up, I'd say the action is one of the clearest strengths of the movie. It feels more grounded, more creative, and more in tune with what Spider-Man action should actually look like. And that's because the cinematography is one of the biggest wins in the movie. This is easily the best looking Spider-Man film in a long time, and the colors, lighting, and overall look make New York feel alive. The score is also really strong. Giacchino gives the music a heavier, more emotional feel, and it fits Peter's headspace really well. I also like how Spider-Man theme feels a little broken here because that matches where Peter is in the story. I first saw this film on Thursday night so I could go ahead and do a non-spoiler review so I could get that out as ASAP. I wanted to go see it again with my wife so I could, get a better impression, make sure my initial impression stayed, and see it, of course, with my wife. But getting tickets to see this film again was a real pain because the response has remained very strong through the opening weekend. Now, this film currently holds a 90% score on Rotten Tomatoes with a popcorn meter at 98, while Metacritic sits at 66 out of 100 from 56 critics, placing it in the generally favorable range, which is normal for Metacritic, it's usually lower. Audiences gave the film an A cinema score. IMDb users are rating the film at an 8.2 out of 10, while Letterboxd users have it at 4.2 out of 5. Now, at the box office, the current Sunday estimate has the film earning $355 million domestically, $572 million internationally, and $927 million worldwide during its opening weekend. Now, that would make it the second largest domestic opening weekend ever, behind Avengers Endgame. And these are still estimates, and they're going to be shifting as the final weekend totals arrive, and of course everything changes as the weeks go on. And once again, make sure you stay seated because there is an ending which implies a lot of stuff. Spider-Man Brand New Day earns a 4 out of 5 from me. This is the kind of Spider-Man film I wanted for after No Way Home. It kind of gives Peter Parker real emotional weight, keeps the action grounded in his choices, and still delivers the humor, movement, and the comic book energy that makes the character work. Ultimately, does Spider-Man Brand New Day pull off what it set out to do? For me, that's an easy yes. Destin Daniel Cretton nails the balance between real human emotion and full-blown blockbuster spectacle. This movie drags the MCU out of that flat, overly CGI'd rut it's been stuck in and gives us a tactile, vibrant New York that actually feels alive again. And the fight sequences here are, hands down, the best the franchise has ever put on screen. On the Marvel side, this is exactly the street-level reset I wanted. Peter's grounded as this lonely, broke adult. I know how that felt once. And characters like Bruce Banner and Frank Castle are actually used as psychological mirrors for him, instead of just being wheeled out for cameos. And for the franchise as a whole, this movie proves superheroes still have plenty of gas left in the tank. Bringing in Sadie Sink's Jean Grey and the DODC's whole anti-mutant angle ties Peter's personal story directly into the mutant saga and everything building towards Secret Wars. Brand New Day isn't just a soft reboot. It's a genuinely emotional, visually stunning win, and it reminded me exactly why I fell in love with a long time ago with Spider-Man in the first place. Now, that's going to do it for me, the full spoiler breakdown. Let me know your theory on that space stinger thing in the comments. And if you enjoyed this one, hit the subscribe to A Constantly Racing Mind and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. You can also support the channel through Intelligent Filmgoers Apparel. The link is in the description. And for those important bio breaks in the middle of a film, there's the Run P app because there's no pause button in the theater. I'm Rob, and this is A Constantly Racing Mind covering sci-fi, horror, action, adventure, prop culture, and all things geek. Thanks for watching, and remember, where every frame tells a story and there's always more to talk about, so take care.